Welcome to another episode of Josh's Car Corner. The project to upgrade the engine in the GTO has not gone quickly. Unfortunately, with COVID shutting down most of the jobs that we go to, it also shut down the car aftermarket. And a lot of the things I needed to get, the parts and everything, I can't get because those places were shut down too, and a lot of things are on back order. I've had to change my plans for what I want to do multiple times, back one way and then go back the other way. Finally, I think I've got a good plan in place and parts are starting to come in and things are starting to fall into motion here. And hopefully before too long, I will be able to finally start building the engine. But while I'm not doing that, I thought what I would do is make a video showing you some of the other upgrades I was going to try to make to the car along with upgrading the engine. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is that I had to scrap my original plan of upgrading my existing block. Now, there's nothing wrong with the block, it's absolutely fine, but in order to get things moving in more of a timely fashion, it made more sense for me just to start fresh with a brand new block. So I have a new block that I purchased and I'm having some modifications made to it that you will find out about soon enough, and I know you would love me to just tell you right now, but I want to keep it all a bit of a secret. So fortunately, because this block is probably in pretty good shape, it might need new bearings down on the cranks and the mains, but I haven't taken it apart yet to find out. But I'm going to save this block, and I wasn't able to sell the heads, and that kind of gave me the green light to say, you know what, I'm just going to keep the original block and heads, so someday I'll have a spare engine. If I want to ever do another project, I thought about a lot putting an LS engine in a mid-90s two-door Chevy Tahoe and doing something like that, or maybe an older truck, or maybe a different car completely. But it never hurts to have a spare engine lying around, and I've got a good one right here, so I'm going to save this block and start with something new. But now that I've got that out of the way, let me show you some of the other upgrades I'm going to be doing to the car. Now, one of the things I will tell you is that the new engine is going to have significantly more power than my old LS2. So one of the things I'm going to have to do is upgrade once again the fuel system. So what I wanted to do is show you what we've got right here. This is the factory fuel pump assembly that comes in the GTO. This is the bucket that comes with the standard system too, and one of the big problems that guys see with these systems is, one, the layout, because the hoses are packed in here kind of tight and they have to kind of work around this whole body right here, and a lot of guys don't like that. Also, as everyone probably knows, it's a returnless system, so it doesn't have a return back to the tank. So one of the upgrades that guys make is to go to a much larger bucket like this one. Now, this one comes out of pickup trucks, this bucket style, and it's commonly known as the 8.1 liter bucket because it was thought that you got these in the 2500 HD and 3500 Chevy and GMC pickups that came with the 8.1 liter V8. However, I have recently discovered it didn't just come in that, it came in some other vehicles as well. So that's where this part comes in. So this entire bucket assembly comes out of an 04 to 08 Chevrolet Express van or a GMC Savannah van. Now, the big difference is the hat itself is metallic instead of plastic. Now, it's got the same bucket as the 8.1, so I just wanted to show you the inner workings of this thing so you can understand why it might be a huge improvement for this project. So the first thing is, as you can see once again, this bucket is significantly bigger to the standard GTO one. And the big advantage of that is that if it can store more fuel, you can have more demand for fuel and you can suck more fuel out of the bucket before it goes empty than you can on this. There's people that speculate that these won't refill fast enough when you start demanding huge amounts of fuel for high horsepower applications. So to get a little extra reserve, you want to go with this guy. So another one of the advantages about this system is it comes with a much larger filter sock. This is much bigger than the sock that comes on the normal GTO setup. In fact, it goes halfway up the bucket. So you'll have a much larger surface area for filtering your fuel that'll last a lot longer, and just having more surface area in general is a good thing for being able to supply the pump with a good amount of fuel. Now, the other part about this that's kind of cool is this mechanism right here. So what you've got here is an in-bucket fuel pump. The GTO has one of these too, but it's kind of heading in the bucket itself, and it's really hard to get out. And then what you got right here, this is the pressure regulator. So the excess pressure is taken off of the feed line right here, coming off of the filter, returned back to the bucket. Now here's the thing, without this in here, you would have the means to either do a dual pump setup really easily, or put one gigantic pump in its place. And then what you would have to do is just custom some new lines, and you have to change one of these fittings around. Now, a lot of you might be asking, what about the fuel gauge? Is it going to read the same? Well, here's the thing. I actually did some testing. So obviously the mechanisms are different, but I took my voltmeter and threw it on ohms, and just to check, I checked the continuity on both of these. Now, the good thing about them is when both these are reading full like that, they both start at full at 40 ohms. And as they trickle down, that ohm reading gradually increases, resistance goes up, and right till you get just before empty, they're both reading 200 ohms. Now when they get all the way to the very bottom, they start going really weird because they're not meant to go that low. But the good news is, from a fuel gauge perspective, they would read probably very close to the same. And even if they didn't, there is a table in HP tuners that you can modify for the resistance to show how much fuel you actually have in the tank. So that's not that big a deal. The things you would have to change is the electrical connections. So that one right there for the evap sensor is exactly the same on both of these. This one is different. This one is a 4-port connector, and the one on the GTO is a 5-pin connector. However, the 5th pin on here does nothing. It's not even required. So all you would have to do is change the connector over to the 4-port connector, and you could run this whole bucket with no problem at all. Now, the other thing you're going to ask about is the connections on top. Well, let's take a look at that. So over here, I've got my fuel tank out of the car. Now, here is the first problem, is when you put this thing in the tank, the orientation it wants to sit in is like this, which, if you look, there's the line coming, the evap line coming up to the tank. It's kind of pointed the wrong way. Now, here's the good thing. You can reorient this to a position that's fairly close to what you need it to be. You can have it right there. All I have to do is cut this little ear off right there. You see this little ear? If I cut that off, then this thing will sit flush and be in that orientation, which isn't quite straight onto this, but this being rubber can easily be turned to plug right in there. And then the wiring, again, there's plenty of wiring right there. You can modify to make that work. Now, the way this hat works is you've got your main evap return here. On the vans, there's a secondary evap return that's not necessary, so you would just cap that off. But this is the feed line for the vans. Now, if you've ever taken one of these apart, you know that that right there is actually the feed line out of the tank, because on the GTOs, it goes out the fuel cell and then exits the bottom of the tank. So changing that on the pump side is not a big deal. So what I've considered doing with this hat is turning that into a return line. All you have to do is cut the hose and redirect it back to the bucket, and suddenly you've got a return line without having to tap any holes or plumb anything. It's just right there for you. See, one of the problems with it when you want to do a return style on the GTO is, guys, you got to tap a hole in here yourself, and you know what happens there. You have the potential for leaks and damage, and something could go wrong. So if ever you can use factory components to make something work, I say do it. And having a metal hat with good hard metal lines that are going to be strong and be resistant to bending and breaking, I say go for it. So I'm going to try to make this thing work in the car. One of the other things I've been working on is back here in the trunk. And by the way, isn't it disgusting how much space there is in this trunk when you don't have to have a fuel cell back there? We got robbed. Australia got the car the way it should have been had. But I have been thinking about relocating my battery back to the trunk for a couple of different reasons. One being weight distribution and just to make some more room in the engine bay. And also, batteries, when they don't have to get constantly heat cycled hot and cold, they last longer. Here in Arizona, that's a big problem, especially when it gets so hot in the summer. Anything you can do to prolong the life of your battery is a good thing. So that's another thing I'm thinking about back here. One of the other things I've been thinking about is actually right here in the engine bay, and it's that guy right there. Now, some of you might know right away what that is, but for those who don't, I will explain. So what we've got right here is the factory computer for the GTO, the E40 PCM. This right here is an E38 PCM, and I think I have figured out how to make a GTO run on an E38 PCM while maintaining control of the instrument cluster and everything inside, the body control module. All of it would still work with that computer. Now, why is this important? Well, for a couple reasons. One, these are getting harder and harder to find, and the price is going up more and more. Now, unfortunately, it's not a direct swap to go from one of these to one of these, even if you can make it work, because this computer is designed to run engines with a 24x crank reluctor. This one is designed to run engines with a 58x crank reluctor. So, where this would be an advantage to GTO guys is if you wanted to drop a 6.2 liter or an LSA or an LS9 or LS7, any of the newer Gen 4 engines that come with the 58x tooth reluctor, this would just be a drop-in installation all of a sudden, because this computer will just run it. And it's got much higher resolution, faster processing power. It's a lot easier to tune because it reacts so much quicker than this one does. And it's also got extra channels for extra sensor inputs that this one cannot support. This will support E85. It's got the ports for the flex fuel sensor. It also has ports for an oil temp sensor. It has allowances, I think, for a second barometer for a supercharger. So this is just a much better program. Now, the reason I've got it sitting here is because the harness I'm going to be using to test this and make it all work is coming out of an SS Camaro, and on the SS Camaro, the ECU sits right there on this rail. So I might just having it there for a mock-up, but eventually I'm going to be pulling this harness out pretty soon, and I'm going to start plumbing and plugging. Obviously, there's going to have to be a lot of customization. This big connection back here, I'm going to have to make that work on the Camaro harness to send information and signals into the car. But this is something I really want to make work. It's something I've thought about for years. And on the software side, I think I finally figured out how to do it. So it opens up a world of possibilities to GTO guys, to Holden guys, to run a newer PCM and run the newer engines without having to change crank reluctors. And it would just be a drop-in installation and give you a better overall program than the E40 does. And by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about crank reluctor, it's this thing right here on the back of the crankshaft. So if you were to spin the crankshaft around a full revolution and count these teeth, you would count 24. And obviously on the Gen 4 engines, there's a newer one that's got 58 different teeth. And they're read by what's called a Hall effect sensor, which sits right here in the block. It counts the high and low points on that reluctor and then can instruct the ECU, okay, this is what cylinder's about ready to fire. This is where the crank is in relation to the camshaft. So it knows which cylinder to fire for ignition and for fuel injection too, because modern ones have sequential fuel injection, fire fuel injectors individually at the right time. So now you know what's going on with the GTO and the other little projects I'm doing along with upgrading the engine. And by the way, once I figure out how to do either of these projects, they will be their own individual episodes, so you can see exactly how I did it, so you can do it for yourself someday if you want to. Like I said, parts are starting to come together really quickly here. Hopefully in the next couple weeks, I'll finally be able to start building the new engine if everything shows up like it's supposed to, and I'll finally get this project moving and start releasing regular content on doing this project. So keep following the channel, keep looking for updates. I'll do them as often as I can, and hopefully I'll get this thing back together in time for SEMA. That is the goal. So once again, thank you for watching Josh's Car Corner, and see you next time. Like what you just saw? Let me know with a thumbs up, or by subscribing and clicking that little bell so you know when new episodes come out. And be sure to join the new Facebook group I set up too for Josh's Car Corner. Okay, so one more thing I have to bring up. It was recently brought to my attention that somebody on the internet created this. It's a meme with Patrick the Starfish from SpongeBob SquarePants where he's trying to work on something, and he's working on it in a much more scientific way after watching Josh's Car Corner. And I think that is a very cool thing. I never thought I'd reach a point in my life where I would be a meme. So if you are the person who created that, please get in touch with me. Or if you know who created that, please tell me who created it, because I would love to speak to them. Thank you.